All right, this is the last in the series, which I call postlude, and it's going to be notes on questions of judging priority and authenticity, that is, among paintings. If you have two paintings, how do you judge which one is the earlier and the more likely to be from the real hand of the artist? And so on. It's a rather complicated matter, which I'll spend quite a bit of time on. Well, I'm going to use examples from the previous lectures, which are familiar to you somewhat, but saying more about them, but also bring in some others in the second half of this, which come from later periods, which illustrate my points better. I think these are extremely important matters, and this will kind of tie up the whole series in a way. A lot of it will be controversial in that not everybody agrees with this, but I think it's important nonetheless. Okay, we begin, first slides please, with the two details from the two versions of the Nymph of the Law River. The two divine figures, goddesses floating up in the air. You will remember, if some of you will anyway, that when I discussed these, I pointed out the difference between the drawing of them and how in what I take to be the earlier version, the Liaoning version, on the left, the figures are drawn so that the volume of the figures and the space between them can be read, and the ribbons that flutter around them go around them and define their three-dimensionality and so on. You remember all that. Whereas in the Beijing version, the copyist, as I take it to be, flattens them, and the figures have no volume, and their ribbons don't work that way, and so on. Okay, this is pretty straightforward. Next, please. Now, then I went on to talk about boats, as you remember. The Liaoning version, which I take to be the earliest and best, is relatively readable. Features such as this kind of ladder-like thing built on the deck, which the boatmen push against as they pull the boat, or the way the ribbons in the upstairs hanging from the balcony, from the canopy, blow effectively and believably in the real one, and hang down straight and are misunderstood in the copy, in the Beijing version, which is on the right now. And then there was still a third version in the Freer Gallery, which all these, what seemed to me to be wrong matters, go further wrong. And I took it to be a copy of the Beijing version. So if that's true, then we have three versions, so three in chronological order. All right, that was relatively simple, if I'm right. Anyway, now then another pairing that I used in the lectures, less easy in this case, is the two pictures, two versions of the painting attributed to Zhou Wanju of the 10th century, titled The Double Screen. And you remember this was supposed to be the emperor of the time of the Southern Tang, Li Hozhu, and his brothers playing Wei Qi, and behind them a screen with a figure lying back, and then another screen in that. So that's why it's called double screen. Now, there are two versions of that. The one I discussed as the earliest and the not the original maybe, but close to the original. It's in the Freer Gallery of Art. And I told how I had kind of discovered it, had it remounted, was going to publish an article on it. But in fact, I left before I did this, and Tom Lawton published a very good piece on it in his book on Chinese figure painting. Okay, however, the Freer Gallery has recently put a new piece on its website, which is on Sungyuan paintings in the collection. It gives pictures of them and information on them and opinions on them from the Freer records. I give a reference to this in my handout. Now, in that, whoever wrote that, the Beijing version is credited as being, quote, generally deemed to be the older of the two. Well, end quote. I don't believe that. I still think the Freer version is older. And I corresponded with old friend Tom Lawton by email, and he agrees with me. And he published it, I say, in his Chinese figure painting, the Freer version, and writes this, quote, "Most significantly, the tremulous brush technique in which the four principal figures are executed is less mannered, suggesting that the Freer version is the earlier work," end quote. Well, okay, I agree with that. In the Freer version, this John B. tremulous brushwork technique for the figures, the drapery drawing of the figures, is much more convincing, early, real, whereas it's largely lost and conventionalized in the Beijing version, which is on the whole much neater, and I take it to be a copy of a later time. I would something else which is a little less obvious maybe, but if you think about the whole point of this painting, which is that it's supposed to provide a kind of deliberate ambiguity in the rendering of space, so that one's first impulse might be to read the space of the screen behind the figures as a continuation of their space, rather than a flat picture behind them. The artist plays a little trick on you, in other words. But in the Freer version, I think this works quite well, as you might see, I might agree here even from these reproductions. And in the Beijing version, less well. I don't have good slides of the Beijing version, so this doesn't really work very well, and I can't make the argument very well. One minor but interesting matter here in the slide of the whole of the Freer. If you see the screen within the screen, the two projecting pieces from the sides of it, one of them on the left is fairly short, whereas the one on the right is much longer and continues behind the figure lying below. I would take that to be an addition by some later owner of the painting or copyist, not copyist, excuse me, some later, well, conceivably copyist, anyway, somebody who extended it by mistake or by misjudgment to go behind the figure so that they don't match. But that, I think, is just a later mistake of somebody who tried to fix something he thought was wrong. Okay, anyway, leaving that aside. Now, the next, please. Now, here we have two pictures of flowers attributed to Mu Chi. The one on the right is the one in Japanese temple, the Soken-in sub-temple of the Daitokuji, representing a hibiscus or rose mallow, as a furung. And then on the other one, the one on the on the right, I guess, on the left, anyway, whichever, is the copy. Not actually the same flower. The copyist may have misunderstood it as a peony. At any rate, this seems to be a picture of a peony. Well, leaving that aside, the two are similar enough that one might be a kind of loose copy after the other. In any case, I discussed these, showing how the brushwork, the ink values, everything in the picture that may be a real Mu Chi is convincing as a work of this great 13th century master. At the same time, it was unacceptable to literati of the time and later who saw it as bad brushwork or things that one shouldn't do anyway. In other words, as I made the argument that Chan artists generally of that time often had to break the rules, so to speak, in order to achieve their effects, which are very important and even great effects. Okay, here is this kind of scratchy, very dark brushwork of the stalks and the puddling of the ink in the blossoms and the way the leaves are represented. All of this quite lively and believable and giving volume to the whole thing. Whereas in the other, the whole image is flattened, but it's made more acceptable for the people who admired this scroll so much. In other words, what was rejected by critics of the time for bad brushwork is exactly what makes it, their bad is our good, so to speak, or at least mine. Okay, leaving that aside, that again is a big argument which I can't make at great length because I don't have the right slides anyway. But going on again now. Okay, here's another one. This pairing puts together two pictures of birds. One on the left is from the anonymous big picture titled Birds in a Thicket of Blossoming Plum and Bamboo, which I take to be a painting of the time of the Emperor Huizong. early 12th century, and possibly by the artist Lian Zheng, who was a major figure in his academy, and the best flower painter, bird and flower painter among them, and for other reasons, this painting might well be by him. At any rate, the bird here, as you see, is painted volumetrically. It's a whole body, fluffy, quite beautifully soft, and anyway, readable as an organic bird, sleeping, by the way. Now, in the other, here on the right is a album leaf attributed to Lian Zheng, which appeared in the Chinese Art Treasures exhibition, signed Lian Zheng, in fact, and which I take to be a copy because it's flat in a way it shouldn't be. Flat and with all the different areas of the bird painted, outlined, as if outlined, set off from each other in a way that completely destroys the roundedness, the volumetric quality, and makes it, it destroys also the kind of fuzziness, the texturing of the bird. Well, this, as I say, works, I think, marvelously well in the original, and worked less well, or doesn't work, in what I would take to be a copy. Now, going on, here is the five-colored parakeet from the scroll attributed to, or I think really by, the Emperor Huizong in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Now, you see here, the bird is indeed flat, and indeed the different areas of the bird are colored neatly, and markings are indicated, and so on, all in a way that flattens the bird. So, does that mean that this is a later copy? No, I think I'm trying to say that our judgments and our criteria for judgment have to be conditioned by different factors that come into the picture, and we have to take all these into consideration. I think that the emperor doing a bird like this might very well have painted it this way to get it ornithologically right, so to speak, and because he wasn't really capable of doing the other kind of bird. Whereas in a painting attributed to a great academy master like Lian Zheng, if you have that kind of flattening and so forth, it doesn't really so it doesn't really work as a coherent organic bird. Then there's something wrong. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be a real Lian Zheng. Okay, enough for that one. Now then, this is really lots of fun. I love this kind of comparisons. Okay, now here's a painting I'm very fond of, attributed to Xiaogui. There's no signature, but in the upper left is a piece of writing by a late Ming connoisseur, collector, major calligrapher named Wang Duo, and he calls it a Xiaogui painting. I think he's right. I reproduced it, although we couldn't have it in the exhibition, in the Possessing the Past exhibition, and discussed it there. Well, this, as you see, it's it may be an early work of Xiaogui, still with a lot of the Li Tong style in it. This axe-cut texture strokes, giving texture to the forms, and the strong light and shadow, and rounded volumetric forms, and so on. Okay, then there are two copies of it that I know. Now here's one later copy. This one's attributed to, an artist named Gao Kaming of the early Song. It doesn't matter. At any rate, now you see, I want to point out, in other words, what typically goes wrong in a copy, and certainly has gone wrong here. The artist, first of all, has flattened the forms, and these readable textured surfaces that you have in the original, and the volumetric masses, the sense of space, all of that is pretty much gone. The forms are flattened. The two large pointed projections at the sides of the main mountain mass are enlarged and kind of bizarre. And importantly, the signs of human habitation, that is the temple in the middle left, the covered bridge below, the thatched houses, is an inn actually down in a bamboo grove in the bottom. All those are enlarged and shown more prominently. That is to say, the artist wants to feature them, and the subtlety of the Xiaogui picture, in which they're more hidden, has been lost. Okay, here is still another copy. The next, please. Yes, this one's attributed to still another artist, Xiao Zhao, who was a follower of Li Tong. At any rate, All wrong attributions, of course. This one I think was in the collection of C.C. Wong. It doesn't matter anyway, old collection. And here there's the things that went wrong have gone more wrong. The big central mass has been diminished and flattened, and these two projecting pieces at the sides are like pointing fingers, pointing upward, quite unnatural and unimpressive. And again, the temple and the covered bridge and the houses or the inn down below, all that has been much enlarged and made more prominent. In other words, the sort of narrative elements of the picture have been enlarged by this artist, so the whole thing has been, all the subtlety has been lost. Okay, enough of that. That's pretty obvious, but I wanted to use it again to make these points. Okay, here we are with a hand scroll in the Musée Czerniewski in Paris. I talked about it at some length, and we talked about Tang Dynasty figure painting, and I introduced it as a fake, a forgery by the great modern forger Zhang Daqian, died in 1983. It is very loosely attributed to Han Gan, an inscription that follows it. I think I mentioned this when I talked about it. And he is supposed to have founded it Dunhuang, so goes the story, Zhang Daqian that is, but actually he made it himself. Now, it represents, you see, 4 horses and 2 grooms, one of them with a red cap hidden behind 2 of the horses, a little bit to the right of the main figure at the end. And as I said, I used to put this on the screen after showing a lot of Tang paintings and talking about Tang painting, and really good students would be able to say, no, that can't be a Tang painting, it doesn't work. But on the other hand, the Czerniewski painting, before they bought it, great authorities were consulted to be sure that they were right in spending all this money. And I won't name them all, but there were major authorities of the time, including my teacher, Max Lohr. And they all said, yes, fine, great work, early work by it. Now, okay, why? One thing, I mean, it's not that my students are smarter than the great authorities, I'm not making that claim, but all the people can be trained to look in certain ways. Another thing to say is that often the original work impresses people more than a copy, or than a photograph or a reproduction. Often it's when you get home and look at photographs that you realize something you saw wasn't really all that good or was better than you thought or whatever. Why this is true, I won't argue, but I've found it to be true over many years. Anyway, this is very impressive in the original, but not so impressive when you simply put it up like this on the screen. Here is the horses. As you see, they are repetitive. They are very flat. They don't occupy space in the way they should. The colors are a little bit over. Well, I won't try to be too simplistic here. But here's the later part of it. But the point I want to make is that the groom behind with the red cap doesn't occupy any space. He isn't given any space. He's just kind of a flat image drawn back there. Here's a detail, by the way, of the close-up of the head of the main groom and the horse. A lot of elaborate aging, tearing of the silk and spattering and so forth has been done by probably maybe a mounter in Japan, at any rate, to make it look old. I'll speak later about this matter of how the analysis of the silk can be helpful, but can be deceptive. Now, next, please. Here is Zhang Daqian, my good friend, and his daughter Sheng, who is my student, as I've said. This is in his later years, but he's the one I think who really did this. He was quite wonderful as a forger, quite brilliant. I mean, I admired him while being, like everybody, kind of fooled sometimes by his paintings. Now, the point I want to make, I bring in here some paintings by the Dutch forger Hans van Meegeren. Han van Meegeren, I guess it is, the recent Dutch forger. This is his Supper at Emmaus. He forged paintings by Vermeer and other Dutch masters, but notably Vermeer. Everybody wanted more Vermeers, and there weren't any more, so he made them. Anyway, Vermeer, he reconstructed a period in which Vermeer might have gone to Italy and been affected by the works of Caravaggio. That's all a complicated story. And he filled in what the people, what the experts wanted to see, so to speak. This best picture, here seen in color, Supper at Emmaus, works pretty well. The three main figures around the table occupy space and so forth. And the figure behind the woman looking over the shoulder of Christ is not so bad. But in others of his lesser paintings, the figures are simply jammed together in a really unacceptable way for a 17th century painting. They don't occupy any space. Another matter, of course, is the faces have this kind of sentimental spirituality, which once you see it, you can't escape. That was a great fault in von Mehermann's own painting. Part of the reasons he was never accepted as a major artist on his own, which is why he tried to get his revenge by fooling everybody. But there's, as I say, kind of sickly, sentimental faces. But look at the figures in the upper left here, all jammed together flat. Or here, Christ teaching. The figures, for instance, the figure to the direct right of Christ, looking up at him and seeing in profile, has no space at all. It's a flat figure. And the figure above him, that is not a rough, but on the upper right, really sort of, anyway, reaches around in front of Christ, in front of the chair in a way, and you can see his hand, in a way that doesn't make any sense spatially. In other words, the paintings don't work spatially. The same is true, I would argue, for Zhang Chen's forgeries. And this can often be a criterion for detecting forgeries. Now here I'll show you, I want to bring in here, my colleague Wen Fong published in 1962 a very good article called The Problem of Forgeries in Chinese Painting, published in Artibus Asiae for 1962. I have a reference in my handout. He discusses this painting, which I'll put on here. This is copied from Wen Fong's reproduction, and here in color, the upper part of the painting, taken also from a reproduction. I don't have original slides. This was a painting of a bodhisattva supposed to have come from Dunhuang, and it had a date on it, and it was very impressive. Bodhisattva holding a glass with flowers in it, and flowers falling all around. There's a dated inscription on it, and a donor, etc. Very impressive. I saw it in Japan in a dealer's hands, and I was so taken with it that I wanted to go back and persuade the Freer Gallery to buy it. By the time I got back to the Freer, I had begun to recognize Zhang Chen's forgeries and was less enthusiastic. But anyway, Wen Fong made the right argument, showing that it was taken actually from a wall painting at Dunhuang, which you see on the right in his reproduction here. And he also analyzed very properly and very skillfully the drawing of things like hands, how the Tang artist is able to draw a hand organically, believably, whereas Zhang Chen, somehow good artist as he was, gets it wrong and doesn't really make a hand that has any organic credibility, so to speak. Okay, but Wen Fong also makes the argument in his article, or not, he doesn't make the argument, he has a long footnote showing how this painting, the one that now is recognized as a fake by Zhang Chen, went through analysis in a technical laboratory in Kyoto and came out absolutely with flying colors. They were going to publish an article on this as an example of Tang Dynasty silk. Nothing could be found wrong with it. So I'm saying his conclusion then was that one had to use art historical criteria because technical analysis doesn't always work. Sometimes it does. The point is that technical analysis, like bad pigments that are wrong or whatever, can often prove work to be inauthentic. It's wrong. But almost never can prove conclusively that it's authentic. For that, you need lots of other kinds of arguments. Okay, enough of that. I should say, by the way, that I've been all the way through this series avoiding talking about the best known, the most discussed case of a highly problematic dating and attribution in recent times. That is, a painting that was bought for a major museum, which purports to be about a great early master. I think many of you know what I'm talking about, but which I firmly believe to be a modern fabrication by Zhang Chen. And I would only say that if my colleagues recognized and respected the methods I've been outlining here, the controversy, I think, would be ended. The painting would immediately be recognized as the recent forgery, as I think it is. Okay, that's my opinion. Others don't feel that way. At any rate, I'm not really talking about that. I keep referring to it without talking about it. Okay, next. Now we have Fan Quan, the great Fan Quan painting, and another one beside it, the one titled Sitting Alone by the Stream, which is a work I would take to be a work by a later follower of Fan Quan. And I use these to show how features of style that begin as representationally effective within a visually descriptive system turn into non-descriptive conventions, something that the artist has learned instead of derived from study of nature and from a long natural process of working out his own style in a Gombrickian way by comparison and comparing and correcting. Anyway, so these the points of style that belong to the school manner are going to work against realism, and the one, in other words, is going to be readable much more successfully as an image of nature and as something you can understand as that, whereas the other takes its place eventually, if you read it right, as a kind of fabrication made up of, things the artist has learned as schoolworks. Here are the details. Such things as, for instance, the outlining of the landscape masses here, the way the things are have little projections and breaks and so forth. Now that has some naturalistic references. I don't say exactly what they are, but if you made a lot of photographs of the edges of rock masses in China, you would find formations like this, and you would understand what Fan Quan was representing, what he had in mind. Whereas in the copy here on the other side, the artist simply sort of does a whole series of little jerks of the brush, pong, 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 imitating what he has learned as how to do outlines in the Fan Quan manner. Or you see here in the upper center a kind of stepped down, left, down, zigzag kind of form. That continues in Fan Quan and Li Tong style things. Okay, let me give just to show you again that you have to keep bringing in other factors to keep the priority straight. Let me give another example that seems to go the other way. Here on the left now is a section of the hand scroll painting by Zhao Lingrong, dated 1100 in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, titled River Landscape with Willows and Cottages, showing the cottages among the trees and fog drifting through the trees and so forth, all the elements of the Zhao Lingrong style in these rather childishly drawn houses, if you will. And then, beside it, painting an album leaf, now in the Cleveland Museum, by Lian Zhong, who is, as I said, mainly a flower and bird painter, but in this case painted a landscape with houses. And Zhao Lingrong's painting, as I say, is dated 1100. Lian Zhong's is dated 1117. But the difference here is that Lian Zhong is a trained professional academy master, and he manages to give much more convincing space to the picture. The terrain, the earth goes back. The earth's surface goes back much more convincingly into space. The trees are more believable. The fog is not as... in other words, what in Zhao Lingrong are the kind of conventional elements of an amateur style, or Lian Zhong turns back into more representational features of a picture. So this certainly doesn't mean that the Lian Zhong picture to have priority, quite the opposite. It's a matter of the professional master adopting imagery and style from a aristocrat amateur. Okay, now a very interesting case indeed, which I spent some time on, but I'll spend some more now. This is the case of the great Ma Yuan painting titled Banquet by Lamplight. The good version, which was originally cataloged as anonymous song in the the Palace Museum cataloging system, versus the version which in that system is attributed to Ma Yuan properly, but now most of us, some of us anyway, see as a Ming copy, or anyway, a later copy. This is the one that has the all the additional elements, houses and trees and a hillside and so on, filling up the upper space, whereas in the original, the upper left section is one of those wonderful voids, misty voids that go back into infinite distance and draw the gaze of the viewer back into distance. As you look at the painting, you see interesting things in the foreground. You are then drawn back further, distant mountains, and then beyond that, just space, 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 which is a very mystical kind of silencing experience. Okay, as I said, the Chinese authorities and the original catalogers made the mistake, I would take it to be, of accepting the Ma Yuan attributed painting as the real one. Now we tend to go the other way. Here, the close-up of the genuine painting. In the foreground are blossoming plum trees, and through these you see the dancers on this platform out in front of the palace. The palace lit by lamps inside. And then the plum trees continue around to the side at the left and around behind, disappearing into mist. Quite wonderful, creating space around the building. And in the copy, I don't have a detailed slide of it, but you can see in the lower part of the whole here, the artist doesn't feel quite up to doing anything so elaborate as that, and he stops the plum trees down by close to the edge of the platform, and then the figures are up above them. He doesn't see the figures. He doesn't depict the figures as seen through the trees, in other words. That's too complicated for him. And he fills in this upper part, as I say, with all these additional things, pine trees and a temple building and distant peaks and all the rest of it. Now, I have, here's another detail from the original showing this quite wonderful way of the artist has of showing the figures of the women playing pipa, or playing musical instruments, entertaining, standing outside and seen between the bare branches of the blossoming trees. Okay, now I used next a painting by Dai Jin of the Ming Dynasty, Returning Late from a Spring Outing it's called, and it's in my Ming book and reproduced everywhere, to show how the Ming artist typically puts big heavy things in the upper part of the picture. He doesn't. The typical Ming artist cannot bear to have these big empty spaces that Ma Yuan loved, and Ma Yuan admirers and Ma Yuan contemporaries love, and insists on putting something big and heavy up there. Okay, then I showed also a painting here, which is a painting ascribed to Ma Yuan, actually with the signature of Ma Yuan, in the Palace Museum in Beijing, titled Landscape with Dancing Peasants. Peasants coming back from a spring outing of some kind, spring party rather, drunk and dancing down below. But this also has all these big heavy things, tall peaks and pine trees and buildings and so on in the upper part, making it for me and some others into something that cannot be a Ma Yuan painting. It's close to Dai Jin. In fact, there's another version of it copied by Dai Jin. Okay, anyway, leaving that aside. So then this is a distinction that seems fairly clear to me. All right, but then you might say, next please, here, what about this? This is a painting, album leaf, fan-shaped album leaf. I put it on and discussed it at length as a possible work of Li Tong. At any rate, very close to Li Tong and very early in the Li Tong style. It actually has an attribution to, of all people, Yan Wengui, which is all wrong, much too early. But as a Li Tong painting, possible Li Tong painting, is I think very important. I reproduced it in my Skira book as that. This also has a fairly large mass, a peak mountain form in the what would be the empty area in the upper left. But here it's a matter, I think, of a painting that belongs at the beginning of this kind of landscape. We're way back at the beginning of this diagonally divided landscape type. And the artist maybe hasn't quite reached the point of keeping the upper part so empty as later artists were to do. So again, we have to take in all kinds of different factors in considering how this compositional type works. This painting, by the way, can be taken, I think, as a good example of the really early style, of really early point of the Li Tong style, and very possibly by Li Tong himself. And here's a detail of it, showing the two kinds of pine trees and this special kind of contour drawing, which is kind of stepped or, like zigzag, whatever you want to call it. And other features, the texture strokes, and also this separation of the heavily textured and solid section in the lower part of this diagonally divided composition and space in the upper. Okay, then if we go on to the works of followers, here is the painting I talked about at some length by Yen Su-ping, who is a later 12th century follower of Li Tong, signed work in the Palace Museum in Beijing, villa on the shore, and I showed details and showed what was happening in the picture. But this is going a little further in this matter of compressing the solid matter and the densely textured matter into the lower part of the picture, and showing that different kinds of pine trees and the texturing of the surfaces and so forth. And then next, another work in the Freer Gallery by a signed work by his brother Yen Su-yu, and both of them working in the academy, both of them late 12th century followers of Li Tong. And here you see very clearly the two kinds of trees, and the in the upper right here, particularly this cliff edge, this particular contour drawing, and also something like it on the contour of the bank in the middle area, and so on. All the elements of the school style, but still done in a way that makes the painting very clearly readable as a fine Li Tong schoolwork. And then the next place, then I went on to show this picture, a signed work of Jia Shigu. Jia Shigu, signature in the lower left, also Palace Museum, Taipei. A little bit later, Li Tong follower, is still working in the academy, in which the style has reached its really heavily mannered phase, I think. The compression of the textured part into the lower corner, and the emptiness of the rest is accentuated here. The two kinds of pine trees are almost like A and B. Here is A, here is B. The zigzag contour drawing. Look at the cliff in a little bit to the right of center down below, the overhanging bank. Bank chug, as he has learned how to draw it and does it just that way. Or here in the detail of it, this heavily texturing, the way the trees are shown growing out of pads of grass. I showed that in a hand scroll attributed to Li Tong, and so on. So this is the sort of end of the mannered phase of the style, and in which the items of the school manual have hardened and turned into conventions which lose their naturalistic descriptive function. Well, this is, you might say, a classic example of the devolution within a stylistic series. Devolution is the opposite of evolution. And then comes a big break, and suddenly Ma Yuan appears in Shaogui, more or less the same time as Jia Shigu, or a little bit later, and simply sent it off in a new direction. Not simply a simple devolution at all, but something brand new and opening the way for something else. So then, next please. So then when you have a picture like this, which is one of the two landscapes in the Koto Inn in Kyoto, attributed to Li Tong. I went on at some length about how Shimada had found a rubbed out hidden signature in this one hanging from the branch of the tree. And a lot of people accepted it and argued passionately for these as genuine works of Li Tong. Well, when you have these and they're called Li Tang, they cannot possibly be fitted into that development. They belong much later. There's no way you can take these pictures, belong at the end of this long devolution, so to speak, and after it, and fit them into the time of Li Tang. Although people tried, God knows, hard to do this. The next, please. What has happened is that another great master, that is Xiaogui, here is a painting by him, a section of his great hand scroll. Another great artist has come along and sent the whole landscape tradition, so to speak, going off in a slightly different direction, has shaken it up and added new features, such as the way you do the rocks with large axe-cuts on, and the way you do the trees with masses of foliage, and so on, and the way you handle space. So the so-called Li Tang pictures in the Kotuan now have to be post-Xiaogui, or so I would argue, and I would be very sure. And I think more and more people are now in agreement with that. Well, so much for the examples that we saw already in the lectures before. Now I'm going to go on to use examples from later periods to make some of the same points or some additional points to go on with this matter of how you tell the real from the copy, or the earlier one from the later one, and so on. All right, and I'll have references on my handouts to where you find reproductions of these. They're not in my previous lectures. Okay, now here, first of all, here is a painting by the early Yuan artist Chen Xuan. Chen Xuan, in the Palace Museum in Taipei, representing autumn melon and grasses. Chen Xuan's inscription up in the upper part of this hanging scroll, with lots of seals, Chen Xuan's own seals to the left of the inscription, 3 of them, arranged vertically. And then down below the painting of autumn melon and other plants and grasses. Here is a detail, next please, of the lower part of this painting. Quite a wonderful painting, which was included in the Chinese Art Treasures exhibition. Well, then, next please, put this beside it. Then in 1987, another version turned up in a auction catalog, Sotheby's, New York, April 1987, and I was there and made slides, as I always did, partly because they were interesting paintings, partly because I wanted to use them for occasions like this. Okay, and these two, this is the same composition as you see, except it's backward, it's reversed. So then this is also turned up recently in a dealer's publication. It's been acquired by this dealer. And it's an early painting, and it's interesting, so I'm not really putting it down totally, but I want to show that the Palace Museum version is the real one, so to speak, the real Chen Xuan, etc. Okay, here are two details from what I take to be the real Chen Xuan on the left. Now, one thing we can look at are the veins of the leaves. Now, these are very important, and it's a subtle difference, and it's not terribly distinct. But if you look closely at the veins of the leaves in the real one, as I take to be the real one on the left, you can see also, by the way, how the leaves curl slightly on the edges as they are indicating the season starting to turn brown and curl. But the veins I mainly look at now, they somewhat follow the organic shape of the leaves and are rather sensitively drawn, so that they bring out the structure, the organic structure of the leaves. It's hard to describe this, but I think you can see what I mean. I'm leaving this on for a while, so I hope, in the hope that you can see it. Now, in the other, it's not a clear difference, but they are more flat, and they're more sort of schematic. They simply fill the space. The artist, that is, draws the main line, and then he draws the little other veins going out from this. And in this way, without really shaping the leaves, or without giving them that kind of, as I say, organic structure, he simply fills the space. Well, other things I would bring out include these tendrils that wind around the leaves, curlicues, little tiny tendrils that wind around the, well, you can see them, and then end up in kind of little spirals. I would think I would say that in the copy these are less believable as organic form, as parts of a plant, a growing plant, somehow botanically correct, than in the original. But it's not a very clear distinction, but I think that's true. Okay, here's a section again from the original, and notice the tendril that grows up from around the center and curls around. Two of them split, and anyway, they seem to be generally of fairly even width, and it's not, in other words, turned into calligraphy to the same degree. Here you can see, by the way, the quite beautiful drawing of the leaf veins and the turning of the leaves and the coloring of the leaves. Here is a detail, next please, from the copy, in which my argument would be that the leaves are more flattened, that the tendrils curl more kind of calligraphically or playfully almost. There are a number of places here. The seals, by the way, on the copy, as I would take it to be, are the seals of the great 16th century collectors, Shang Yuan and others, and I think Qianlong Emperor there too. I think so. Well, I'll talk about seals in a minute. Here, another detail closer up, and you can see closer these tendrils and the leaf veins. Okay, the next. And here a detail from the real one, which is a stalk of some kind of seed-bearing stalk. The seed-bearing things up at the top, and then the leaves, narrow leaves going out from it with lines down the center. Well, I've talked all the way through how the movement of the hand of the artist drawing a form such as this, the lines such as this, lines and strokes such as this, somehow embody the nature of the thing that's being depicted. Flexibility, the stiffness and yet flexibility of the stalk. It bears the weight of the leaves and this thing at the top, the seed-bearing thing, whatever it is. And the artist does this, I won't say unconsciously, but it's part of the training of an artist to be able to convey the qualities, the physical qualities of things that are being depicted. Now, Chen Chuan is an amateur artist, so obviously, and there are going to be people who will say, but Chen Chuan wasn't the kind of artist who depicted things accurately. He wasn't doing realism. That's a bad word in China. And if you have something realistic, then maybe it isn't the real artist. I think that's a bad argument. I'll come back to that in just a bit. Next, if we can put this horizontal picture beside the original with the hanging scroll with the inscription at the top of the painting with the melons. This is another painting by Chen Chuan. This one is in the this is in the Chinese Art Treasures exhibition. The other is in my book on Yuan painting. But this is the Chen scroll titled "Squirrel on a Peach Branch." Well, you can see here too that I want to make the point that one way of working on authenticity questions is to compare the painting in question with what are recognized as genuine, reliable works of the artist, and see which one matches best. Notice here how nicely the leaves sort of brown and crumble at the ends, showing the season, and how the leaves turn in space. And anyway, quite a wonderful little painting. Wan Fong and I got in a big argument about Chen Chuan early in our career. I had bought for the Freer Gallery a figure painting, Yang Guifei mounting a horse. Wan Fong had bought for Princeton Art Museum a painting from Japan with a Chen Chuan seal on it. Lovely little painting, quite possibly by him. I never argued that. And anyway, we got into authenticity arguments on Chen Chuan. And at one point, Wan Fong had written a long, quite polemical piece against me and sent it to me. And I said, wrote back saying, okay, here we go. gloves off. Now we're going to really have the bloody, etc. Okay, here we go. And he decided not to, and he was not frightened. He's never been afraid of me any more than I'm afraid of him. But we decided not to do this after all. And we've been good friends all the way down over the years. So, okay, anyway, my point then being that I should say here that one should. I'm not denying the value of the kinds of studies of authenticity that concentrate on the calligraphy of the inscriptions, like the one of Chen and one of the paintings here, or the reliability of the seals and the tracing of the provenance of the painting, the history of the painting, and old catalogs. All these things I did it, God knows, myself, although there are lots of people who can do it better than I can. This is never one of my real strengths. I'm not denying the value of these. They are indeed necessary, and as I say, other people can use them far better than I can. But these two can be misleading. People can say the seals on this painting are right, therefore it's a real Chen. C.C. Wang always cautioned against comparing seals to determine genuine versus fake, saying this one has the real seal, says the genuine one. He saw this as a misuse of the book that he and Victoria Kontag had compiled, the seal book. I'll have a reference to that at the end of my handout also. And they compiled it in 1940, a book of seals, and people used to use that, saying this seal matches perfectly the one in Kontag and Wang, and therefore this is a real painting. So C.C. Wang, and I think he actually argued this in the reprint of his book, or I had a preface to that. I made this argument based on him. But he said this is a misuse. You can't do this. The seals don't match that well. You can't match, for instance, the seals of Shenzhou or Wenzhangming and expect you're going to come up with the original painting. It doesn't work. Okay, anyway, enough of that. Now, here's another very interesting work. This is a painting in the Palace Museum in Beijing by the great Yuan Dynasty landscape master Huang Gongwang, a relatively early work, earlier than his most famous works, that is, a hand scroll in ink on paper, painted probably in the 1330s, not dated, but around then, and titled simply Hills Beyond a River. No, excuse me, Rivers and Hills Before Rain, I'm sorry. Hills Beyond a River is the title of my book. Rivers and Hills Before Rain, the first section of the painting by Huang Gongwang. Now, two copies. I published this maybe for the first time, at any rate. I think for the first time, at any rate, in my Yuan book. Saw it in Beijing, and together with authorities there, recognized as a major Huang Gongwang painting that was little known or unknown. Now, two copies of that turned up in later times. One of them was in the hands of a dealer in Hong Kong. The other, I'm not sure. Now, these are a very difficult case, but I want to use it anyway to show you, to put side by side the original and the copy. Now, here is the first section of what I take to be the good copy. This one has seals of the Qianlong Emperor, located slightly differently than on what I take to be the original, and extremely close. You can compare branches of trees and all kinds of things. If you get down into really close comparisons, you'll find things in the original that don't come through in the copy quite right. Down here in the lower right, this bunch of dark paintings of bushes and dark leaves and so on. In the original, this it doesn't turn into simply flat pattern, and in the copy it does. And the trees grow more organically. And well, I'm saying these things which are very subjective. This isn't really objective analysis at all, and I'm not claiming that it is. The matter of ink and paper too. The slides are not good to show that. I'm not claiming they are, but if you have a trained eye, you can usually, or sometimes, look at a painting and say that looks like it's really good Yuan Dynasty paper. Sometimes collectors have claimed they can really tell the date of a painting from the paper. I don't believe that's true, but you can make a pretty good guess sometimes. That helps to confirm other kinds of purposes. My colleague and good friend and someone I admire, Robert Mowry, of the Harvard Art Museum, Sackler so-called. I once spent a time with him. He's done work on dating silks, and I once spent time with him, which convinced me that he's got a very good eye for dating silk, and can say that looks like Yuan Dynasty silk, or that looks like Good Sung silk, or this, etc. At any rate, his datings based on the silk were close to the ones I would make from style, so that I was convinced anyway. I hope he'll publish something on this in time. At any rate, it can be done. Okay, then, let's see. The next, please. And then there's still another copy here, the third. This is the one with sort of a streak going down the middle, which is also has the Qianlong seals, and is much less good. This is pretty obviously no good. The trees, the groups of trees and bushes and so on in the foreground are flattened. They don't grow organically. They lose the, well, if I start talking about good brushwork, then I'm in something really very subjective. But the kind of brushwork that is, Huang Gongwang is not a painter supposed to be known for, again, for naturalistic or for making the trees seem to grow and so on. Nobody says that about him in his time. They praise him for great brushwork and new innovations of style and so on. And yet, in spite of this, Huang Gongwang, in fact, gets the trees much more imbued with real sense of growth and natural tangle in the trees and bushes, and wonderful use of ink values, varying ink values to render depth, make some things go forward and some back. And even in the drawing of the texture strokes on the hills in the distance, they are not simply repeated and as kind of done as repetitively as they will be in the copies. Here's the copy, the same section in the copy, and as you see, well, these are hard things to point out. In the middle right here, you see, as I say, a lot of little dark horizontal blobs rendering bushes that turn into a somewhat flat pattern. And I don't know, if I had lots of time and a precursor and so on, I could point out point by point. But the point is that you can I think you can read the real Huang Gongwang by not only good brushwork in the sense of good in itself, but brushwork that depicts properly, that renders the forms, that makes them readable. The upper edges of the banks of fog have a somewhat scalloped, simple contour, but not so much so as the copies. The copyists will turn this into simple chunk, rounded forms. And the hills are quite wonderfully shaped and given by them. These are, of course, in the tradition of Dongyuan with the lumpy tops and so on, but as is done by this great Yuan Dynasty artist. This is the next to last section of one of the copies, and you see how the upper edges of the cloud banks are done too repetitively and unnaturally, and somehow, I would say, reveal the hand of the copyist. And next, here's the last section of this copy, which is a good copy, but and by itself it might fool you. I'm not saying that I get it right all the time. My God, no. I'm not making that claim anywhere in this whole series. I make my mistakes as much as anybody, and a lot of things judgments that I made in old days now I see as wrong, and so forth. But nobody gets it right all the time. At any rate, well, sometimes one meets up with old established connoisseurs, Chinese or Japanese, who do make almost such claims, Chinese particularly. Anyway, a really good, skillful handling of matters of seals and calligraphy. And as I say, I'm not convinced that reading seals and calligraphy and judging by them works any better than judging from the painting. In fact, people who use seals and calligraphy and all the standard old Chinese methods of connoisseurship are likely to differ with each other as much as we do. So they can't all be right, so to speak. So, in fact, they don't, they're no more right than we are. Okay, now, next, please. Okay, this is another quite wonderful painting that I've reproduced, I think maybe for the first time, I'm not sure, but at any rate, I put it in my Ming book. I may have posted it before, but I don't remember. It's by Wenzheng Ming, artist of the 16th century mainly, titled Living Aloft, Lo Ju Tu, living upstairs, so to speak, dated 1543, now in the Metropolitan Museum, New York. Yeah, I had it in my Parting of the Shore book. And I will show, along with it, a copy. But let me just speak a bit about the original for a minute. This was the painting done by Wenzheng Ming for a fellow official who had been in official service, and now at the age of 70 or so, he was retiring, coming back to Suzhou, and his ambition was to build a two-story house and live up above, so to speak, above the world, and getting away from the world, the kind of dusty, messy world that he had had to be involved in as an official. And Wenzheng Ming did this quite wonderful painting for him to show him what his house was going to be like, and in fact represented him in the house before the house was actually built. I have a section on it here in my Ming book. Lo Ju Tu, Living Aloft, dedicated to a Mr. Liu Lin, who had just left government service at the age of 70 and returned to Suzhou, where he planned to build a two-story house and dwell on the upper floor. Wenzheng Ming suggests, perhaps punningly, that the plan reveals Liu's lofty-mindedness, portrays the house before it in fact was completed, with Liu and a friend seen in the upper story, and adds a poem describing how the windows of the house would open on all 8 sides. The poem ends, while worldly affairs shift and change, the lofty man is centered and at peace. Well, then I went on to analyze this picture compositionally and show how Wenzheng Ming had very effectively brought out a special meaning. That is, he moves the man away from the rest of the world. He bars us from entry to the picture in a lot of ways. Bare trees in the foreground, a river, a bank, a wall, a space, a whole bunch of trees, and then up above all that, surrounded by trees, the man in his house. Okay, quite wonderful. Now let's see what happens with a copy. Here's a copy which I saw in a dealer's place in Hong Kong again. This is a fairly easy case, but I want to put it on just to make certain points. Now we see immediately that it doesn't work as well spatially. And let me say again that Wenzheng Ming is not a painter you think of as wonderfully given to representing three-dimensional forms and space and all of that. That's not what he's known for. And yet, within his style, within his somewhat flattening style, linear in color, within this he does indeed bring out very effectively the spaces in his paintings. And this is true, I think, of good artists of all times. In fact, it's the last thing that Chinese connoisseurs ascribe to them, because they say these artists were not interested in realism or representation or xingci, so your criteria are wrong. I think that's an absolutely wrong argument. Anyway, I've been persuaded for many years, and I'm certainly persuaded now, that good artists are the ones who, among other things, besides all their stylistic, brilliant stylistic innovations and so on, among other things, produce good pictures. And I've been for years saying that we should all have a sign on our study wall saying, "It's a picture, stupid," based on Kennedy's famous, well, anyway, you know that. All right, anyway, now here's what I take to be the forgery. And you see that the trees in the foreground are not set off clearly from what goes behind and so forth. Well, let me show the details which bring this out more clearly. Here is the foreground area of the original, with these two wonderful bare old trees marking the foreground plane, or very close to the foreground plane. And then behind that, a river, and then an earth bank, and a bridge. So you have to go across the bridge, enter the garden through this gateway, which one panel of the door is open, and then you make your way into the further space to get to the house. So you have to really make your way through this painting, and that's the whole point of it. He's not easily reachable, this Mr. Liu. He's isolated himself in the world. By the way, while this is on the screen, look at the wall. This is the way a Chinese wall is made, many of them. It's made by packing clay down into a mold and so on, putting a roof on it to shield it from the weather. But down below, at the bottom of it, flat stones are set into the base of it to strengthen it, because that's where the wear is, where water and wear and people kicking or things, whatever it may be, are going to erode the wall if you don't make it strong. So they set in flat stones this way to strengthen it. And this is very effective, and later I'll talk about this and show an actual example and show a case where this is misunderstood. Wan Zhengming here gets it very right. Now here's the copy, same section of the copy. You see, just to take care of this matter quickly, this artist doesn't understand this way the wall is built, and he doesn't put these stones in, and the wall is simply rather flat. But apart from that, the foreground tree is not completely clearly set off in space. It doesn't push the rest back, this repoussoir effect. And the wall doesn't clearly define a space into which you enter. In other words, the whole thing is somewhat flattened. The next, please. Okay, here is the copy again, the bad one. I don't have good slides except one more of the original, but here's the copy. Okay, and making the same point, the spaciousness of the original, the way you enter one space after another, is somewhat lost here as the artist flattens the whole thing out. The space between the wall and the trees, the space you go through in the garden, is not so clearly rendered. And the trees are treated repetitively and flat. And the trees don't go around the house as they're supposed to. The trees, the wall, and the rest of it, and all these upper trees are flattened. Okay, enough. Now here is a good slide of the original. And here I want to make an important point. The whole point of the picture is how this house is set among trees, and the trees go around it. The further ones are lighter, and the nearer ones darker. And the trees are distinguished by foliage as usual, and by shape and so on. Okay, that works. Now look at the house itself. Very beautifully spacious. The two walls at the right and left going back, and with open windows, like he says in his poem, it's going to be open on all sides. And Mr. Liu is seen with a guest here in the foreground, sitting and talking. Behind them is a table. Notice how the legs of the table are shown. So the table actually is quite substantial. It sits on the floor. And then behind them a screen. Over on the right here's a servant bringing a little thing of wine on a tray. Behind is some shelving with books and scrolls. If you look closely, I should have a closer detail, but I don't. And as I say, the trees quite beautifully and effectively going around this and setting the whole thing in the middle of foliage, and then the distant mountains. Okay, here now is the copy. The artist doesn't seem quite capable or willing to try to continue the trees around the house. He doesn't do that, and the whole thing then flattens out, and the whole effect of being the building being surrounded by trees is lost. And then the trees themselves are so done so repetitively and flatly, with less distinction in ink tone and foliage and so on, so they simply create a sort of flat area across the bottom. And then you look inside the house. The boy has disappeared. The copyist doesn't trouble to paint him in. And then the next I have a detail getting in closer. Here's the house. Well, as you see, everything goes wrong. The table behind the figures doesn't have legs anymore. It doesn't shown as sitting neatly. The roof of the house somehow he muddles it up with ink wash that puddles. That shouldn't be there. The boy has disappeared, as I say, and the The shelves with books are wrong. Anyway, it's a pretty good copy, but if you know the original, it's just a great come down, falling off. Okay, enough of that one. That's a pretty clear but interesting example, I think. Now, okay, here we go. Here is a hanging scroll, ink and light colors on silk, that appeared in an auction. I, for years, went to the great auctions that were held in New York twice a year at Sotheby's and Christie's. And I would go all the way to New York, particularly to visit these auction galleries and photograph the important paintings, the ones I was interested in, partly for my own research, partly so I could go back and recommend them to people or people I was advising. There were several people who would ask my opinion about this picture before they bought it. Anyway, it was worth doing for lots of reasons. I still have thousands of slides made from these auctions. Okay, here is one of them. This is a painting that appeared in from an old auction catalog. I don't have the reference. Anyway, river landscape attributed to the Yuan dynasty artist Sheng Mo. Well, I realized somehow it looked familiar, or the upper part of it especially. It didn't look quite right. It didn't look like Sheng Mo, first of all. He has a distinct style, and this isn't it. But then what is the artist doing? Okay, then, next please. Put beside it, please. This is a painting in the Chinese Art Treasures exhibition by Chu Ying, a major 16th century artist. Chu Ying, Suzhou painter, titled Waiting for the Fairy in Autumn, National Palace Museum in Taipei, the Chinese Art Treasures exhibition. Well, the forger, as you see, this is a broad painting, figures in the foreground in the lower left. They're on their way to a party going on in a house across the way, waiting for the fairy to come back and carry them across. And then beyond that, various landscapes with buildings. Now, if it's a broad painting, and you see the line down the middle, vertical line, which means that it's in two bits of silk, from two different lengths of silk put together, joined together. This is common for painting. Sometimes you have as many as three. And often these can be separated and remounted separately. And somebody gets the left half and somebody else gets the right half. At any rate, what has happened is that our copyist, as you see, has copied the upper part of the right half of this painting, the hills and then the river bank with trees and buildings down below. The section down below that and the is not exactly copied. He's turned it more into a Yuan dynasty thing. But okay, anyway, you can see the point. It's based on this well-known painting. Now then, I'm going to interject a painting that another case, which involves my colleague and good friend Sherman Lee. Okay, this is first here on the screen. This is a painting, part of a horizontal painting, one of two paintings originally mounted together in a single hand scroll. And this is titled, Zhuangzi's Butterfly Dream. I think if you know Zhuangzi, the great early Taoist philosopher who dreamed he was a butterfly. And then he woke up and he couldn't quite make up his mind whether he was Zhuangzi having dreamed he was a butterfly or was a butterfly now dreaming he was Zhuangzi. Typical Zhuangzi. Anyway, you know that. Okay, anyway, here he is sleeping, this sleeping figure on a kind of a couch out in the garden, and his servant boy, Bitong, down in the lower left. Okay, now this painting was formerly mounted together with another one that I'll show in a minute, two of them together, and they were involved, this one especially was involved in a famous court case, not famous, but famous among the people who know about it, between C.C. Wang, Wang Jichen, the great Chinese connoisseur collector and so on, and Walter Hochstetter, who died fairly recently, someone I admired, knew well, liked, although he was a pretty difficult person in lots of ways. Walter Hochstetter, a major dealer who handled lots of first-class paintings, wonderfully knowledgeable in ceramics, eccentric certainly. Okay, I'm not going to get on to Walter Hochstetter. But at any rate, he and Wang used to engage in trades. I made trades with Wang too, and we got all right, and I traded with Hochstetter. But Wang and Hochstetter made one trade in which Hochstetter felt he had been badly cheated. He had got things that were not as valuable as they were supposed to be, and he brought suit against Wang in New York. And there's a court case, and there is to be a reference to the transcript of this case on my handout. Okay, at any rate, Hochstetter claims that this painting, which had been part of what Wang gave him in the trade, wasn't as old and valuable as Wang had said it was. And Sherman Lee appeared testifying for Hochstetter. Now, next, please. This is pretty complicated. I'll try to make it short. The other painting in the scroll is this one, which is now in the Nelson Gallery in Kansas City, and is a quite wonderful Yuan Dynasty painting, generally recognized as a genuine work of a Yuan artist named Liu Guandao. It's called Whiling Away the Summer. A man lying back on his platform out in the garden, two women attendants, his peepaw behind him, and so on. And then behind him a screen with a screen on it. So it's another double screen picture like the one attributed to Zhou and Xu that we saw earlier. Okay, anyway, this picture was originally attributed to the Southern Sung figure painter, Liu Song-nian, Southern Sung Academy. But then the famous collector, connoisseur Wu Hufan, the teacher of C.C. Wang, discovered on it, down in the lower corner, you can't see it here, a tiny signature reading Guandao, and he recognized it, that is, as a genuine work of the Yuan Dynasty painter Liu Guandao. So this became famous as a Liu Guandao, and it's been published as that, and anyway, accepted by everybody. Now, if the other painting, Zhuangzi's Dream, had really been the same artist and had been a companion to it, it would be very valuable. But in fact, it isn't. It's a later copy of who knows what, and isn't nearly as valuable. At any rate, Sherman Lee, next please. Sherman Lee appeared in the court case testifying on behalf of Hochstetter, showing why this painting was not old and good. It had in fact been shown already to several museums, so its value was much diminished, and they had rejected it, that is, and it was generally not nearly as good a painting. Well, one could make an argument on the basis of the figure style, the flattening drawing of the drapery and so on, but I'm not going to try to do that. Anyway, down here, next please, down in the lower corner, where this sleeping Tongzi is a place where Sherman Lee found there and tried to show to the court, to the judge and the lawyers, using slides. He gave them an art historical lecture, and he tried to show them where the artist had made the copyist had made a real mistake. I'm not going to try to reproduce his argument because I don't have the right slides, but there's a tear here that goes down the painting, and somewhere down below in this stand, this piece of furniture, there's a place where the artist, he says, and I don't have the right slides to show it, had painted over the tear in a way that showed that it was, no good. That if it had been genuine, the two parts would be more displaced on the tear. Anyway, he made this argument, and he claimed that his example offers, quote, incontrovertible proof, unquote, that the painting is a copy or a forgery. Now, I have made this kind of argument throughout my career, not necessarily over a tear or whatever, but good and bad versions of things, and what I call pictorial integrity, which is violated when a copyist misunderstands something in the picture, some representational feature, where the original artist gets it right and the copyist gets it wrong. Okay, in writing about this, now I have a reference to an article of my own on authenticity in my handout. In writing about this, I used examples also from a 1962 symposium that I organized, so-called post-mortem symposium on the Chinese Art Treasures exhibition, in which several of the great people of that time used this kind of method. Alexander Soper talking about how a certain artist got the architecture in his painting right for the Sung Dynasty, whereas others got it wrong. Or where Sickman may be arguing for where something is painted wrong, and it shows that it's not a genuine stone painting, or where they're trying to date the ceramics in a painting to show that if you find Yuan dynasty ceramics reproduced in a would-be Song dynasty painting, obviously it can't be Song. That is, the general rule is the painting cannot be earlier than the latest datable imagery or feature in it. That's obvious. All right, enough of that. At any rate, I argue this at length. Now, what is strange is that there's been a firm resistance from most later specialists to this idea, which I've been promoting, and Sherman Lee was, this idea of pictorial integrity, and to my practice of it. I quoted as an analogy what Carlo Ginzburg wrote about the method used by an Italian scholar, or whatever, art historian, named Giovanni Morelli, around 1870, how the Morellian method, this is pretty well known to Western art specialists, the Morellian method by which you identified individual hands of individual artists by looking at things that you don't normally notice, like the way he paints ears or whatever, how this led to sensational reattributions of important Italian paintings. What had been as a Titian was now seen as a Giorgione, whatever. Even so, although it worked, it was heavily criticized, as he points out. This is Carlo Ginzburg writing, heavily criticized by specialists of the time, quote, in part perhaps because of the almost arrogant certainty with which he applied it, end quote. And I asked with mock horror in my article, can it be that Sherman Lee and I have been seen as, but no, perish the thought, in other words, as arrogant, and of course we were. Arrogant certainty is Sherman and myself. Well, at any rate, this is unfortunate. That is that this difference between specialists has led to the disuse or the failure to use this, what seems to me, very important and, in fact, self-evidently right method. So I'm hoping that younger people in the field can somehow escape from all the fuss that us older people have made against each other, and begin to use this method more and recognize it, and for the great advance of Chinese painting studies. Okay, enough of that. I wanted to mention this because it has been a matter of considerable concern to me, simply because because I think it used right, it can solve a lot of questions that are otherwise seen as unsolvable. And I'll show a few more examples. Okay, the next, please. Okay, now, here is a section of a hand scroll painting by Shunzhou, or possibly by Shunzhou, or close to Shunzhou anyway, I think. Another major Ming artist, whom some of you know, Shunzhou, titled The White Cloud Spring. It's a hand scroll, and ink and some color on silk. A surviving section of what was originally a longer scroll representing scenes of Wu, Wu being the Suzhou area, famous places in Wu, as though you took a kind of tour. Well, this version on silk was owned by my stepfather, George Schlenker, now is in the Allen Memorial Art Museum in Oberlin College. His collection of Chinese paintings was sold to them, including some quite fine things. I collected them for him. At any rate, this section of the scroll represents a place outside Suzhou, Mount Tianping, and the ancestral shrine of Fan Zhongyan, an important figure from the Song dynasty, at the base of it. I've been to the real place, and it really looks like this. Rocks on the hillside, and the pine trees, and the shrine building down below. I have slides from the original, but I don't have it with me. At any rate, then here's another section of it a bit further on. I could show the whole thing, but I don't want to. Now, this painting was owned by a Japanese dealer named Kawai in Kyoto, Kawai Shogodo. And after Kawai's death, Larry Sickman and John Crawford, traveling together, visited Kawai's son and bought from him another version of this painting, which had been, Kawai had owned both of them. Here is the section of the other Kawai scroll, painted on paper. And this was bought for the Nelson Gallery in Kansas City. And they brought it back. And when I heard that they had done this, I remembered the silk version as being better. So I went back to Kawai's son and bought very cheap the silk version for my stepfather. Now, what I'm going to talk about is the wall again. Look down here at the wall around the shrine of Fanzhongyan, and you see these place where the stones, flat stones, are set into the base of the wall, more or less alternating, large and small. And of course, they can't have a stone that covers the place where the wall bends. It's impossible. And it's fairly, it's simply represented, but believably represented. Okay, now here, let's look for a minute at, here's the old, here's a real wall in a place outside Suzhou. And you see these flat stones as they're set in as a kind of base for the wall, and then up above, the wall is made of plaster and painted and so on, and there's a roof on it. All right. But it needs to be this, as I say, to protect the lower part of the wall from wear and keep it solid. And here is a detail of a Sung painting, which I reproduced, I talked about earlier, with a wall like that, not quite so clear-cut, but yes, you can see the rocks at the bottom of it. And then we have the section of Wen Zhengming's Living Aloft painting, if we can bring that back. Okay, and what happens in the what I take to be the copy now in Kansas City? Okay, here again is the Kansas City version, the same section, the buildings behind pine trees, the wall, and so on. But look at the way the stones are done down against the wall. The artist has misunderstood this and seen it as if it were large stones piled against the wall, and the lower outline is not straight. That is, they're rough as if they're separate rocks. One of them is placed right over the bend in the wall, which of course is impossible. In other words, he has misunderstood a feature of the building of walls, whether he's from a different place or somehow got it wrong. This is the kind of thing that I see as definitive, really, in showing the hand of the copyist. Here, another detail from the Kansas City scroll, in which here again, stones piled against, large stones piled against the bottom of the wall. The drawing of the architecture here is also very kind of schematic and flattening. Well, the Nelson Gallery scroll is published in the 8 Dynasties catalog, number 152 in the catalog. And Mark Wilson, writing about it, Mark Wilson, who was for many years the director and old friend, good guy, on page 184, he writes of the scroll that I bought for my stepfather, that is the Schrenker Oberon version, as, quote, painted on reddish-brown dyed silk. That is silk fake to look old. And, quote, inarticulate and unschooled brushwork that, quote, suggests an inexperienced painter. Okay, that shows two people having a very different view of this painting, or of the relationship between these two paintings. Now, here next, please. Here is a detail of the upper, further up on the hillside from the Kansas City scroll. Now, here we probably should be able to tell even from this, or I would say, Mark Wilson and others, of course, will differ, say that this shows it to be the copy, because it's the way the trees are drawn, flattening and repetitive and so on, the way these little outcroppings of rock are drawn, same way, don't really render three-dimensional form, and the waterfall over on the right, it's all flattening. Okay, anyway. Now here, next, finally, another version of this scroll is in the Palace Museum in Beijing. Excuse me, Palace Museum in Taiwan. And this was published by Zhang Zhaoshan, very fine curator, who did a serious study of Wu school painting, Suzhou school painting, publishes the original. He took this to be the original. Now, if we can zero in again on the rocks against the wall, this must be a copy of the Kansas City scroll, I think, because the artist here has not only understood them as piled against the wall with lower contour, not straight, and various dots to that, but he has drawn shading behind them to set them off from the wall, to make them stand out from the wall. Okay, he has taken it from the Kansas City scroll, presumably, or from something like it, and has made it clearer that the stones are piled up against the base of the wall, the same way back in the middle right here. Okay, but this seems to me a fairly clear-cut case of copy and a copy of a copy. Okay then, so much for that one. Now, going on to another very important case. Here is a large painting in the Palace Museum in Taipei, supposed to be by the Middle Ming artist Du Jin, active in Nanjing, a professional artist. I have a long section on him in my book on Ming painting. Very interesting artist. Specialist in, well, figure painting, but also landscape of the figures. Titled Enjoying Antiquities, showing two scholars, one of them seated in the middle, and then his guest, presumably, to the left of him, looking at antique bronzes on a table. So this scholar, who is a rich collector, has invited his friend to come and eat and drink with him and enjoy antiquities. And down in the lower left is a servant who is bringing scroll paintings for them to look at, or another scroll painting. Up in the upper right are two women on opposite sides of a table who are unwrapping a chin. One of them is presumably going to play on the chin. And they're preparing also, I think, things for... Well, I'm not sure what they're preparing. We'll see details of that. And then down on the right here is a boy, a little servant boy with a fan trying to catch a butterfly by the flowers. Okay, a lovely big painting, and probably mounted on a screen originally, from the size of it and the shape of it. Now, I published this in my book on Ming painting. This is reproduced in the Possessing the Past catalog, by the way, the exhibition at the Met from the National Palace Museum in Taipei. And it's there accepted. Richard Barnhart writes about it and accepts it as a genuine work by Du Jin. I had published it earlier, however, in my book on Ming painting, Parting at the Shore, figure 73, presenting it as probably a copy by some Suzhou artist, somebody close to Chu Ying, maybe Chu Ying himself. And various things about the painting persuaded me that it was not the original, but a copy. Let's look at a couple details, first of all. I'm not saying that you can tell from the painting itself easily, or from the details. There are things that might make you wonder, sort of flattening drawing of the drapery folds, and I don't know, various other. Here's the two figures enjoying the antiques. There are numbers of paintings of this from the Ming Dynasty. It's a favorite topic. Old people or just elegant scholars enjoying antiquities, admiring each other's collections. People did get together in the Ming to look at each other's collections. Okay, and here even closer up. And you could, if you wanted to, try to identify the various bronzes, match them up with existing bronze vessels. This is okay, something worth doing. But I'm not trying that here. Now the next, please. Okay, here in a very unclear photograph with a little table in front, one of the reasons that I questioned the big Palace Museum complete picture was that I had found in Japan and photographed another version of the left 1/3 of it, the left section, in which you see the servant bringing a scroll and a table and a little table with stuff on it. Now this is hanging in the tokonoma, or the alcove, of all places, in one of the big galleries in the Kongo-buji. Kongo-buji is a great esoteric Buddhist temple on Koyasan, Mount Koya, in Japan. I think I talked about this in some connection. It used to be hard to reach and wonderfully quiet and mysterious, and now it's overrun by tourists apparently. But they built roads up there. But anyway, leaving that aside, I was up there around 1970, and in the Kongo-buji, I saw in the distance this painting, a dark silk painting, hanging in the tokonoma on the far wall. And I asked our guide if I could take my shoe, if I could go across the the room and look at it, maybe photograph it. He said, sure, go ahead. So I think we had to get permission from the temple authorities. We did. And I made this photograph. And then the next, please. Here's a better something made from my negative. Well, as you see, here, let's put beside it. Yes, the next, please. Here's the corresponding section of the Palace Museum picture. Now, in the Congo Buji version, by the way, we've tried to locate that painting ever since, and it's not in the temple collection. It was just lent to them probably by some, maybe the family of one of the monks, or who knows, or some believer who lent them a painting to hang in their tokonoma. It isn't anything like a great Buddhist temple is going to have in its collection. And nobody's ever been able to find it again. So we know it only from the photograph. But here we are. Now, in the Congo Buji version, you see the banana palms are, well, various things. I would read the leaves of the banana palms as more convincingly occupying space, and the others as more flattened and having the qualities of the copy. Same way for the stalks of them. One of my students was Charles Mason, and his wife was a specialist in garden plants, very knowledgeable on how to grow them and so on. And she pointed out, seeing this, that in the Palace Museum version, that is what I take to be the copy, they are planted right up against the concrete or stone slabs that make under the railing. And if you planted the trees that close to the stone slabs, they're not going to grow. Their roots have no space to grow in. Okay, whereas in the other one, as you see, they're spaced more sensibly out in the earth, out beyond the railings. Okay, and then the question of the next, please. The calligraphy, I don't pretend to be a specialist or good enough in calligraphy to make the judgments. The calligraphy of the Congo Buji version looks better to me, but I only say looks in a rather vague way. But you do see here the drawing of the leaves of the banana palm. We had one growing in our backyard and house in Berkeley, so I was able to see how they grow and really understand how the leaves tatter and all these things. Okay, the next. Then, as this argument was going on, then another version of the right one-third of this, with the two women at the table preparing, unwrapping the chin and so forth, appeared in a New York auction in the 1990s. Now, all this, there's something which I have reference to in my on my handout called the Great Dujin Correspondence, something like that. Dick Barnhart and Stephen Little, who had been his student, and Maxwell Hearn of the Met, all argued the other way. So the Palace Museum picture was the real thing. And I had some long correspondence with them. I was arguing it was a copy and why. So all this, eventually, it seemed so valuable to the field to get our various opinions down this way that I persuaded them to let us publish it all. And Howard Rogers published it in his journal, Kaikodo Journal. Okay, anyway, that's all there on the in your reading or in the ad lib. I'm only suggesting if you want to, you can read it. At any rate, they were arguing that the Palace Museum version is the original. I was arguing that the one in the Congo Buji of the left section and this one in the new auction painting, which has just turned up in New York, of the right section, were somehow closer to the original. I'm not saying they go together or they're part of the original or whatever, but these seem to be the real thing, and the other isn't. The other is definitely a copy for me. Okay, at any rate, this section at the right, this was eventually bought by the Yale Art Gallery by Dick Barnhart, even though he differed from me on the priority of these and so on. He had the very good sense, I think, to buy it for the Yale Art Gallery, and that's where it is now. It had some dumb old attribution to Zhou Wenju or something stupid like that. But it could be from the original Dujin. And at any rate, it's much better, I think, than the other version. Okay. Now, let's see. Here, yeah, here's the same thing in black and white. The upper part of it is different. A large garden rock and banana palms and so on. So it isn't exactly the same in composition, but it's obviously the same, based on the same basic composition. Okay, here is the two figures from the version now in Yale, the better versions, I take it, and the two women, in my reading at least, are more, in the ways I've been talking about all through this, more volumetric, more readable as real bodies under the robes, and more readable as space between them, and so on in every way. Here, even closer up, the drawing of the drapery. Well, I've shown numbers of cases of this now, where the drapery seems to be believable as going over a solid body, and there is a real form under the drapery, so it's not simply flattening. Here's just a slide of the upper part with bamboo hanging over, and the ornamental rock and the banana palms again. These are not in the other one, so there's nothing to compare it with. But the drawing of the screen behind, as you see it, as a woven screen pattern down below, painted by the artist, is really quite convincing and good. And let's see now here. Yes, here's the. This is the corresponding section, a black and white slide, a black and white photograph of the corresponding section in the Taipei version, in which the figures, to my eye, are not so believably drawn. And behind them is a screen with a landscape on it, and a single thing of bamboo hanging over it, and no banana palms, etc. Okay, now getting in closer. Yes, this is the detail from the Taipei one, the one I take to be the Suzhou copy, closer up. And I would take it that the both figures are less believable, convincing as real people under the drapery. The drapery drawing is more flattening. I would go on a whole bunch of other things. The scrolls and the mounted albums that are on the table behind them, and the drawing of the ribbons, and the one thing one should do always is to compare, as I said in connection with the Qinshuan painting of melons and autumn grasses, compare it with other reliable works of the artist and see which one matches the reliable works of the artist better. Now, in the Shanghai Museum or Nanjing Museum, anyway, a hand scroll by Du Jin, from which this is a detail, generally accepted as his work, Palace Ladies, and here you see one of the ladies, and what I would speak of as a completely convincing drawing of drapery, so that it reveals the volume of the body, the way the band goes around the waist, the drapery drawing over the knees, the upper arms, somewhat foreshortened, but at any rate, believable. Whereas the drapery drawing in the other one is, say, flattening and unconvincing. Now, going on and getting in closer to the version now in Yale, here, coming closer, the two women are really drawn quite beautifully, so that their heads, their faces are quite lovely for one thing, but also the hair ornaments, quite elaborate hair ornaments up above. Here, let's put them two on the screen side by side, the one on the right and the one on the left, showing the women's gold and jeweled hair ornaments, and also their drapery drawing, the way the one of the things goes around the shoulder of the woman at the right. Well, okay, you can see this for yourselves. If I got into the way her hands are working to untie the ribbons of the chin and so forth, that would be another matter. I could do that for all of this. And here's the other woman with the quite marvelous shown in profile and quite wonderful hair ornament. Okay, now that we come down to the tripod, down here at the on the table is a tripod, a bronze tripod with sand probably and ashes over it, and it's probably something burning for heating something. Probably something to do with what the woman at the left is holding. They may be, and then in a vase next to it, metal chopsticks and a spoon for lifting things out of the tripod. Now, I'm not sure what this is used for, but they're heating something or other. Anyway, there it is. Now look at the legs of the tripod and the stand. The three legs of the tripod fit into the rounded hollow at the stand. Whether it's a lacquered stand, I don't know. It's red and it flares out a little bit at the bottom. Anyway, fitted neatly in. Now let's go back and look at the same passage. We'll have to do this by getting a detail from the whole side of the version in Taipei. Now here the copy, as I take him to be, has made a real blunder. He paints the tripod, all right, and he paints the base, making the base flare out a bit more at the bottom rather awkwardly. But then he plants the two legs of the tripod at diametrically opposite points in the base, right across from each other in the base, and realizes that if he painted in the third leg of the tripod, it's going to have to hang out here at the left in a very awkward way outside the base. And he can't do that. And he can't throw away his big painting, which he probably put a lot of work into. So he simply leaves it off. And so we have a two-legged tripod. Well, when I wrote my one of my last letters to my colleagues, I've used this ever since. The two-legged tripod has become my very symbol of something that goes wrong in a painting that reveals the hand of the copyist. And I wrote these people saying, I'd like to say QED, I have proved my case. Not a bit of it. They all three of them came back with, no, it isn't. That doesn't really prove it at all. It's okay for the painting to have a tripod with two legs, and they had different reasons for. I'm not going to try to give the reason. It's all there in the correspondence, but they didn't give an inch. Anyway, so as I say, I simply appeal to younger people in the field. Come on, let's sort of try to drop all the stuff that people of my generation went through and take it easier. Actually, my generation was a lot better than that of Max Allure. Max and Allure and his colleagues, or Oswald Suran, and a great feud went on between Allure and Bernard Karlgren, and Suran was fighting with everybody, and so on. So my generation, we've gotten together pretty good. Dick Barnhart and our friends, Wan Feng and our friends, even while we argue. So it's been pretty good. But it can be even better maybe in the next generation. Now, finally, I want to show a couple other details from, not finally, but next to the last, to show leaves from an album of what are called funban, or sketch copies. Fun is actually powder, and it's based on an old system of copying, which you would prick holes in the original and lay it down and put powder on the back of it so it comes through and outlines the form. Anyway, it's a way of copying. But funban, or Japanese fumpon, is a copy made by artists typically from paintings they saw, which they could use later in paintings they did. The kinds of artists who would do paintings with old details in them. Now, the artist Gu Jianlong, an artist who's figured very strongly in all my recent writings. He's a big figure in the book I'm about to publish. Anyway, Gu Jianlong, 1606 to 1687, 17th century artist. Larry Sickman had the good sense to buy in China. Nobody else was buying these things in those days. For the Nelson Gallery to buy an album of 46 funban, or sketch copies by Gu Jianlong from paintings he had seen, with notes by him on them, talking about the paintings, talking about the colors, talking about all kinds of things. 46 leaves. The whole thing is published in 8 Dynasties, number 254. And I used a couple leaves of this in my book on pictures for use and pleasure. Anyway, never mind. So Gu Jianlong, you can match up some of the leaves in Gu Jianlong's funban album with extant paintings. For instance, this one at the top shows he's copied details from an old painting attributed to the Liao artist Hu Huai, or Hu Gui, unsure how to pronounce it. At any rate, you see this passage with the kind of tunnel going through or a gateway in the pass in the mountains, and in the original, people are approaching it. Here, put beside it, please. This is a detail from a painting I showed earlier in one of my lectures, painting now in the Palace Museum, which I take to be maybe an original Hu Gui or Hu Huai, which nobody has paid any attention to, really, practically nobody. Anyway, showing these people about to go through this passageway. Actually, the painting has been torn, the original, and some of the gateway has been lost, the left section of it. So this kind of, the copy, the Funbun copy made before this happened, shows what it originally looked like. So then Gu Jianlong also copies, the next please, from the main central section of the scroll. In the far distance, you see a hut, a Mongol, one of the kind of portable dwellings that they could knock down and carry on their horses. Hut, the word hut comes actually from Mongol yurt. It's one of the few words that we actually adopted from the Mongol. Anyway, so here's one of them, and flags flying in the wind beside it. And for whatever reason, Gu Jianlong decided he could use that detail, so he copied it. And then he wrote about Hu Huai and notes on the painting and on his copies. The next, please. Another in his copy album shows figures, or the heads and headdresses of figures from various old figure paintings attributed to Zhou Fang of the Tang Dynasty and others. And he is particularly interested in headdresses and various ornamental details and so on. Well, how he used those, I had here in my, here's a painting that I reproduce in my new book, which I attribute to Gu Jianlong by style, showing Yang Guifei bathing and Ming Huang up on the upper right here, spying on her while she bathes, to see her naked. And anyway, Gu Jianlong did paintings of this kind in which he needed to paint, not really, he didn't try to get them right. They're quite anachronistic, but so they're not right for the period, but at least they look old and they're impressive. And things like the headdresses and various ornamental details he uses his old funbun. Originally, there apparently were piles and piles of them. Wang Shimin, his good friend, the landscapist, writes somewhere about how Gu Jianlong's funbun were piled up as high as he himself. He just compiled lots of them as he went around looking at old paintings and used them in his own paintings. Okay, that's I used to put that in to bring out another kind of copy. I'm talking about how artists use old paintings partly, or how copyists. Well, anyway, it's obvious what I've been doing. Now, finally, I put on, here is a famous leaf from everybody's favorite, really, album by Shi Tao, the great individualist master of the 17th century, 17th, early 18th. And he's a great master. And this is an album called Album for Taoist Yu. Variously dated, I would date it somewhere around the mid-1690s, maybe. It was originally owned by Victoria Kontag. It's one of that wonderful group of Kontag paintings that, long story, which I won't go through again, but failed. Avery Brundage failed to buy the collection for San Francisco, the Asian Art Museum, because of bad advice from his then advisor, Yvonne Dargencey. Anyway, who tried to persuade him that people doubted this album, it wasn't really genuine. Okay, leaving that aside, the present whereabouts unknown. What is one of the great paintings owned by C.C. Wang that were pulled out from his collection before he died by one of his children, presumably, and they're who knows where. At any rate, so we have only great details. Okay, this is an album. This is a leaf from it, which Victoria Kontag herself published when she owned it. Published in a little German book of the Justice album, not very well known. I had it in my Fantastics and Eccentrics exhibition, 1967, and wrote about it there in a way I'll probably quote. Then Jerome Silbergelt used it on the cover of his Chinese painting Style. I used it in my compelling image, and it was used on the cover, and so on. Okay, anyway. Now, in my, it shows, as you see, a man seated at his desk looking out in a house that's under the cliff, surrounded by swirling landscape masses and Dian dots, which are done in color. Let's show some, go on and show some details of this. I have a series of details here, a man in the house, and then moving upward from the lower part into the upper right and finally the man himself. And this is my old fantastic eccentric catalog. I really wrote this kind of thing better then than I could now. This is a distant memory of somebody who really wrote better than I did this kind of thing better than I can. Here we go. In the most powerful leaf of them all, number blank, a man is seen at his desk in a house beneath an overhanging cliff. The rocks are outlined with thick, broken, dragged strokes, varying in tone from pale gray to the deepest black, with the heaviest areas leading the eye from the right foreground along an S-curve that encloses the house. The upward-pointing rocks below initiate the movement, which is carried upward and back by interweaving strokes like streams of pure energy that dissipate at last into the void at upper right. Wow, I wish I could write like that. Everything interpenetrates, interacts. The Taoist and Neo-Confucian conception of the world as organism is set forth here as compellingly as in any Song painting. Over the whole structure are scattered large dian, that is dots, in large blue and red-brown tones, another brilliant innovation of Dao Ji's. He was then called Dao Ji, now we call him Shi Tao. That's another question. They do not cling to the masses, but seem to hover above them, like agitated motes of weightless matter, reducing the bulk of the underlying forms to the point where rocks change before one's eyes, from corporeal objects to insubstantial networks of line, like grasses blown in the wind. Scarcely noticed at first, in the midst of all this, is the scholar in his retreat, gazing outward, surrounded by sheer bursts of light and color and movement, but remaining placid. Wow. Okay, that's the way I wrote in those days. Now, everybody has, including me, has taken this as a brilliantly original work. Could this be a derivative work? No, of course not. Nobody could have done this except by sheer brilliant invention. And it's been seen, I think, properly as well, it is a brilliantly original work. There's no question of that. But later I realized, and when I came upon another picture, that in fact he had taken some of the conception, some of the elements of the picture from an earlier painting by the artist Gongxian. Now, in my compelling image book, in treating Shi Tao, I show how he went around during his long career, coming into contact with the different schools of painting. The Anhui school in his early period, the Nanjing school, Gongxian and Fan Qi and others in the 1680s, and then later the so-called Orthodox masters in Beijing when he went there, and so on, and how these contexts affected his own painting, how he adopts certain forms and techniques and traits of style and uses them in his own paintings. And this is in no way, against his originality. As part of his brilliance, he's able to do these. That argument has been questioned or opposed by some people, but all right, I still believe it. I had a seminar on Shi Tao, and Richard Vinograd was in it and wrote an article on the same theme, quite fine, which he published. Okay, anyway, now I discovered, here it is, a leaf from an album by Gongxian in the Palace Museum in Beijing, in color. Gongxian paintings in color are quite rare, and this is a rare example and quite marvelous example. Now, this has to be earlier because Gongxian died in 1689, while the Shi Tao album, my dating would be mid-1690s, and in any case, nobody's going to date it back to this time. And how is it like? They're very different, of course, but what does he take from Gongxian? First of all, house. In this case, it's not a house with a man in it, but just a small 3-story house built on the edge of the cliff, sort of surrounded by the cliff. But more than that, the use of color, the pale blue-green color and the yellow-orange color, and the rather loose, dissolved lines that seem to push upward from the bottom, as to build a movement that comes up and centers on this house and then sort of swirls around it into the cliffs above. And perhaps most of all, the use of dian, or dots, which are not only hovering around outside the forms, as I pointed out on the Shurtao painting. Here's a detail of the Gongxian, which will show this better. They not only hover somewhat apart from the forms, but they're done in orange and green or blue-green color. So Gongxian starts out these quite wonderful new ideas, and Shurtao takes them up, and produces a more extreme, more radical, and perhaps even more brilliant version of it. Well, but it's interesting. I mean, I find it extremely interesting, and it goes along with my whole idea about the creation of art and the importance of drawing on the past, and the fact that drawing on the past in creative ways like this does not in any way take away the originality of the artist. This is a complete misconception which has been perpetuated in lots of writings about Chinese art anyway. In other words, drawing productively on the past does not erode originality in any way. Usually it's, on the contrary, it strengthens the work. Okay, enough for that point, and I hope it's made powerfully by these two paintings.